Hey everybody, it is December 18th. It's about 10:30 in the morning. I am still tired. I've only had one cup of coffee. And I just finished watching the last episode of The Mandalorian because you can't trust the internet anymore, and I had to watch it as soon as I got up in the morning. But it's okay, I have today off, so it's not that big of a deal. But I am inspired to start work on my Bo-Katan helmet that I've had over here for about a week, and so I'm gonna get into that right now with you guys. For this Bo-Katan helmet, I'm using a file from Mystery. I'll make sure to link him down in the description below. And I printed this out in a dome piece as well as the bottom piece and all of the little grievely bits that you can see here. The first step in getting this helmet ready for any kind of priming work is to connect that dome piece and the bottom piece together. For that, I'm just sanding them down with a 150 grit sanding block that I have and super gluing them together with Bob Smith's super glue. This glue gives you about 15 seconds of working time, so I mess around with the placement a little bit, and once I'm happy with that, I just hit it with a little bit of zip kicker to ensure that my super glue is all nice and cured for the next step. I then take out a soldering iron or a wood burning tool and I go over that seam and try to weld it together. This doesn't need to be particularly clean because we will be sanding this down later on. However, I do recommend wearing some type of respiratory mask whenever you're doing this because if you hit any of that super glue, it is going to kick up some really toxic fumes, and there are a few points in this where I actually started to cry because it really started to irritate me. So again, do as I say, not as I do. Once that welded seam has cooled down and dried, I just go back over it with some plastic clippers and clip off any excess that I see. I then take my helmet out to my garage and just do a quick pass with my mouth sander with 100 grit sandpaper. This is kind of just to get it a little bit more melted together for me for the next step, which is some Bondo filler, and this is not the usual Bondo that I typically use. This type of Bondo comes in handy whenever you need to cover a really deep seam like the one we've got going on the dome. The one drawback to it though is that it has a really short working time. As you can see, I only mixed up a little bit of it, and that's really all that I needed to cover the seam, but it makes it really hard to use as a method of actually filling in all of the print lines on your helmet. And that's why I typically will use that other type of Bondo to fill in the print lines along the entire helmet, because it has a longer working time and is much easier to spread along and get into all the nooks and crannies of your helmet. Once you've got that layer on, it's time to let it sit for about an hour or two to cure, and then we'll get down to some sanding. While I wait for the helmet to cure, I'm taking all of the grievely bits and taking that other type of Bondo that I have, the stuff in the tube, and just smearing that all over the grievely bits so that I can start to get rid of all those ugly print lines. And I printed this at 0.2mm layer height, and I don't know why it had such really pronounced layer lines, but oh well, that's what this Bondo is here for. So I'm just taking this on top of a prime bag apparently, but hey, it works out. It doesn't get it all over my workspace. And make sure to wear gloves whenever you're smearing this all over your little grievely bits because you don't want this to come into contact with your skin. I'll let all of these grievely bits dry for about 2 hours whenever I go out to the garage into my garage fort where I can sand thanks to my husband, no boys allowed. And so begins the fun of sanding down our helmet. This time I'm going over it with 120 grit sandpaper to get that seam line all nice and flush with the rest of the black on the helmet. And as you can see here, it's looking pretty smooth, but we've got a long way to go. And here we are again with the Bondo sand repeat phase of getting a 3D printed prop ready to look like it came right off the screen. The trick with this stuff is to put it on into very thin layers. Don't glob it on because essentially you're just going to be sanding that all away and wasting product. Thin, smooth layers are really what you're striving for, and trust me, it'll take you a couple props to get there. I'm not even there. I mean, goodness, look at this. This isn't smooth at all. But this is what it's gonna look like after about 2.5 hours of cure time. It's pretty globbed up, but as you can tell, I really did try to put really thin layers on there. But that's okay, because now we're gonna get out that mouse sander again, and we're gonna sand this all down, and then we're gonna do this whole Bondo step all over again. I've got 120 grit sandpaper on my mouse sander, and I'm just going all over the helmet trying to get those high spots down to the low. And after I'm done with my mouse sander, I take some of my little sanding bricks. I think I was using 150 grit and also 200 grit just to get it smoothed down a little bit more. And with this particular helmet, there were a lot of places where the Bondo could kind of like seep and just get itself stuck. And to get that out, I'm just taking one of these little dental pick things that I got from Harbor Freight and just picking all that Bondo out and sanding it back down with my little sanding bricks. And here you can see everything looking pretty nice and smooth after one pass of sand and one pass of Bondo. And as I said earlier in the video and in countless other videos that I've done, this is essentially the step where you're going to start doing your Bondo, sanding, and repeating until the helmet or the prop that you're working on is as smooth as you want it to. I get so many questions and DMs from people asking me when a helmet is smooth enough, and I really can't tell you. That's really up to you, and it's really a kind of a thing that you kind of have to get a feel for. I will tell you one tip, and that is if you're not sure if your helmet is looking smooth enough, that's whenever you can probably hit it with a bit of filler primer, and that will show you all of your crimes, which is what I'm doing right here. Once you've got a layer of that filler primer on, it really does show you all of the layer lines that you may have missed and all the areas that could use a little bit more sanding. So if you feel like you've been going at it with the Bondo and sanding a little bit too long and you can't really see any of your mistakes, hit it with some filler primer and you will be amazed. As you can see here, from far away that helmet looks pretty smooth, doesn't it? But oh god, look at all of those layer lines that I still need to go at. And that's okay, that's exactly why I put that filler primer on. So what I'm going to do here is take some 220 grit sandpaper and just hand sand all of those high spots and try and get them down to the low. And once that was all sanded down, I went back over it with a little bit more Bondo just to help me out a little bit in the sanding department. I did it on a little bit of my grievelies too. Now that that layer of Bondo is cured, how many times am I going to say that in this video? I'm going over the entire helmet with some 200, 220 grit, and 300 grits of sandpaper in block form that I got from Harbor Freight. Kind of hard to tell from this with all the Bondo and the gray filler primer, but it actually is pretty smooth to the touch. So what I'm going to do now is start going with even higher grits of sandpaper, and I'm taking 400 grit sandpaper, going all over the helmet and smoothing, again, getting all of those high spots down to the low spots. At this point, I'm fairly happy with the finish that I've got going on, and I'm just dusting all of that Bondo dust away with a makeup brush. And now it's time for my final layer of filler primer, and as you can see, I got a lazy Susan to paint my helmets. Wow, I'm moving up in the world. I give the helmet one final dusting with my makeup brush and give it a nice thick coat of that filler primer to fill in all of the last remaining layer lines that we may have lingering on the helmet. At this point, you really could consider this helmet done. Well, I mean done in the finishing phase, but I wanted to take this up a notch by sanding even further with higher grits of sandpaper. So you can see here, I'm going with some 800 grit sandpaper as well as some 1500 grit sandpaper. You can really tell the difference that it's making in the primer itself because the primer starts to become kind of shiny in a way and almost glossy. And trust me, this will translate to the finished product because whenever I lay down my metallic paint first step, oh, it's gonna look so smooth. I just know it and I can't wait to do that, but we'll have to wait until next week for that video. And here's Bo-Katan's helmet all ready for some paint to be slapped on it. Oh, I can't wait, I'm so excited. Again, thank you so much to MMM Mystery for providing this file for me to try out. I really like it. And one thing that I did forget to mention is that it actually comes with that optional gasket that you can see underneath the helmet. I just didn't print it yet because I don't see myself actually using it on this helmet just for the time being, but I'm sure I will in the future. As always, guys, thank you so much for sticking around to the end of the video. And if you have any questions, feel free to leave them down in the comments below. And I will see you guys next time. Hi, Brian! Bye!